Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome to the Movie Marquee. Today we'll be reviewing our third movie in our Rob Reiner Spotlight, the 1993 release of A Few Good Men. With me are my two co-hosts, Eric.
Ask me nicely.
And Ted.
We live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's going to do it? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you could possibly fathom.
And I'm Ken, and you don't even know me. Normally, it takes someone hours to discover I'm not fit to handle a podcast.
Very true.
Let's dive in. Eric, what do you have on A Few Good Men?
Well, Ken, A Few Good Men was released on December 11th, 1992, had a domestic budget of $41 million and grossed $141 million in the U.S. and worldwide $243 million. This movie has an all-star cast, as we all know, starring Tom Cruise as Lieutenant Daniel Caffey, Jack Nicholson as Colonel Nathan R. Jessup, Demi Moore as Lieutenant Joanne Galloway, Kevin Bacon as Captain Jack Ross, Kevin Pollak as Lieutenant Sam Weinberg, James Marshall as Private First Class Loudon Downey, J.T. Walsh as Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Markinson, Keither Sutherland as Lieutenant Jonathan Kendrick, Christopher Guest as Dr. Stone, and rounding out Wolfgang Bodison in his acting debut and probably his only movie, Lance Corporal Harold Bodison. And actually there's a few notable Noah Wiley as Corporal Jeffrey Barnes and Cuba Gooding Jr. as Corporal Carl Hammaker. Good time.
Show me the money.
Show me the money. That is
Show me the dead Marine.
Show me the dead Marine.
We already went there. Wow.
We already went there. So what else do you want to know about this movie, Ken?
Let's talk about reviews. What did the critics have to say?
Critics really did like this movie. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a certified fresh score of 83%, and the audience gave it 89%. Some of the big names that love this movie are Peter Travers of Rolling Stone, said that the performances are uniformly outstanding, is a tribute to Rob Reiner, who directs with masterly assurance, fusing suspense and character to create a movie that literally vibrates with energy. Entertainment Weekly says, like all courtroom dramas, A Few Good Men is gimmicky and synthetic. It's also an irresistible throwback to the sort of sharp-edge entertainment Hollywood once provided with regularity. The New York Times said a big commercial entertainment of usually satisfying order. Variety magazine said expert story construction and compelling the spring and direction make all the narrative elements pay off as it's calculated by a precision instrument in which all the parts are working perfectly. Not a lot of negative reviews, but there are a few. Roger Ebert only gave it 2.5 stars, unfortunately. He said the film doesn't make us work. It doesn't allow us to figure out things for ourselves. It's afraid we'll miss things if they're not spelled out. He
actually gave it a thumbs down when I was watching it at the movies.
Yeah.
He gave it a thumbs down because of the scene of when he explains what he wants Jessup to do on the stand. He says that one scene ruined it for him.
Interesting.
The Globe says, Jay Scott says the performers are powerless to bring life to the moribund courtroom drama. A snoozer.
Now, I disagree with that.
He can handle the truth.
He can't handle the truth. And the New Yorker says the moral discussions operate like a bad pair of elevator shoes. What the hell are elevator shoes? I don't know. It's obvious that their function is to lift black and white melodrama into message movie paradise. The whole film, with its steady, important picture pacing and its bits of pseudo-profundity, is a piece of glorified banality.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's banality?
Banality.
That's a big word.
Christmas.
Boring.
You know
Boring.
what? That's a guy who got a dictionary for Christmas. are one of those word-a-day calendars.
Pretty much, and just worked them
and
all in.
and trying to work them all in at once.
And that review is from December 14th of 92, so right after it came out. Pretty brutal.
That's not just that it's written horribly.
Overall, the critics really like this movie. There's many more positives than negatives.
I don't disagree with Roger Ebert a whole lot, but I think he's discounting a little bit that the story was a play, so that it kind of has to lead you along. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like I said, I don't disagree with him very often, but I have to disagree with him a little bit here.
So, Ken, you said he gave it a thumbs down, huh?
He gave it a thumbs down on that. Gene Siskel liked it. He thought the performances were strong, especially by the two main leads.
Beautiful.
He had a lot of great things to say about Tom Cruise, actually. Let's move into the plot. So, Ted, take it away.
A Few Good Men is the story of two Marines, Lance Corporal Harold Dawson and Private Loudon Downey, on trial for the murder of a fellow Marine, Private William Santiago. The murder takes place at the Marine base at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The Marine base is under the command of Colonel Nathan Jessup, a hardened Marine colonel that is in line for a high-ranking job in Washington, D.C. Dawson, Downey, and Santiago were members of the same company under the command of Lieutenant Jonathan Kendrick. When the murder takes place, Santiago had been lobbying for a recommission off the Guantanamo Bay base due to an undiagnosed illness and the harsh discipline of Lieutenant Kendrick and Colonel Jessup. After finding out about the transfer request made by Santiago that included classified information concerning a firearm discharge across enemy lines, Jessup decides that a transfer should not be done and that Kendrick should, quote-unquote, train Santiago, meaning Kendrick should order the unit to give an informal punishment called a Code Red. It is during the commission of the Code Red that Santiago, due to the undiagnosed health condition, aspirates and dies from lactic acidosis. Dawson and Downey, who were ordered to give the Code Red, were then arrested for murder. Colonel Jessup covers up any involvement of himself or Kendrick in the issuing of the Code Red. Dawson and Downey are provided a lawyer for their general court-martial. Their lawyer is Lieutenant Daniel Caffey, a brash and cocky lawyer in the JAG Corps. The son of a former attorney general, Caffey is out to take the path of least resistance in defending all of his clients, but he has a shrewd legal mind that seems to get fair plea bargains for his clients. When assigned the case of Downey and Dawson, Caffey does not intend to take the case to court. Lieutenant Commander Joanne Galloway forces her way onto the defense team because she believes that there was a cover-up and that Dawson and Downey were ordered to give the Code Red. They finally agree to take the case to court after visiting the Guantanamo Bay base and interviewing Jessup and Kendrick. The trial begins and Caffey and the defense team are in an uphill battle after a particularly bad cross-examination of the doctor from the Guantanamo Bay base. Their luck seems to turn when AWOL officer Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Markinson shows up in Caffey's car. He then proceeds to confirm Galloway's assumptions that Jessup and Kendrick ordered the Code Red, that Jessup wrote a phony transfer order for Santiago after his death, and he also doctored the flight logs to show that there was not an earlier flight off the Guantanamo Bay base the night Santiago died. As things are starting to look up for the defense team, they have a disastrous day in court when they put Downey on the stand. He testifies that he was not in the barracks when Kendrick gave the Code Red order, and that Dawson had indeed given him the direct order. After the disaster in court, Caffey learns that Markinson, not wanting to testify against Jessup, commits suicide. With all hope lost for winning the case, they decide to go for one last long shot. Try to make Jessup admit on the stand that he ordered the Code Red. On the final day in court, the defense team calls Colonel Jessup to the stand. After an intense examination of Jessup, Caffey acts as if Jessup has bested him, but then disrespectfully tells the higher-ranking colonel to sit back down at the witness stand. Furious over the disrespect shown to him, Colonel Jessup loses his cool on the stand and in a fit of rage, screams at Caffey that he did order the Code Red and would do it again. Colonel Jessup is then taken into custody. The military managers of the court-martial, or the jury, find Dawson and Downey not guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder, but guilty of conduct unbecoming of a Marine, and they are sentenced to time served and a dishonorable discharge from the Marines. Caffey and Galloway walk away from the case knowing that they won the case.
All right, thanks, Ted. When was the first time you guys saw A Few Good Men? Eric?
I have no idea when I first saw this movie. Most movies I'm pretty good at remembering when I've seen them. This one, I honestly could not tell you. I know it wasn't in the theater. I probably saw it on cable somewhere.
Fair enough. What about you, Ted?
I'm kind of in the same situation as Eric. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out when I first saw this movie. It would have probably been in high school. The cast of this movie would have been enough to make me want to see the movie. I mean, I love Jack Nicholson and I really do like Tom Cruise a lot.
Do you remember seeing it in the theater?
No,
No.
I wouldn't have seen it in the theater. But nowadays, it would have been something that I would have seen in the theater. And if the movie had come out like a few years later because it was nominated for Best Picture, because I try to see all of the Best Picture nominees, I would have seen it in the theater. But no, I think still would have been a little bit too young to have seen it in the theater. But I would have definitely have rented it. I know that for sure.
I would say I remember watching it off of cable. Not sure if it was HBO or like the movie channel. It was just off of cable, and I repeatedly watched it over and over again because it was an enjoyable flick, in my opinion, at the time. And throughout the years, it's actually been something that's grown higher and higher up my list, basically because of the two leads. So let's talk about this movie. Aaron Sorkin was the playwright because this was originally a play that he wrote, and then he was hired to be the screenwriter of this movie. What do you think of the dialogue in this movie? How do you see the pacing of this movie working out?
For me, pacing this movie starts out fairly slow. It gets better, but it's not really a strong paced movie. There's a lot of obvious stuff that's kind of pointed out. In my opinion, Tom Cruise playing an attorney, he's really playing his cards wide and open with members of his staff and members of other people around him of what he's going to do, what his plan is, what if it doesn't work, how he's going to play everything, which I don't think is very believable. The dialogue, it's tolerable at best until, and I stress this, until the final cross-examination with Colonel Nathan R. Jessup. That is probably one of my top 10, maybe top 15 greatest scenes in cinematic movies. I'm glued to it every time I watch that scene where he just lays into him and tricks him into admitting it because of his, how he wants respect and he thinks he's better than everyone and he thinks he's above the law. I think that's played very well. I think that's very realistic as a court drama, and the finale of it does play well. Hell, I don't even remember the question, Ken. I'm sorry. I'm just going on here.
That's what we're looking at here. We're looking at dialogue and pacing. What are your thoughts on it, Ted?
The dialogue and the pacing of the movie, I mean, you have to look at it and approach it and not judge it too harshly as far as movie goes, because it has the pacing of the play, which is what this truly is at its heart.
That's great if it's a play or if it's on Broadway, but in cinematic movie, it's got to go a little bit faster.
It's tough because it has that pacing. But let's be honest, the whole movie is a build-up to that last 20 minutes.
It's a build-up, but it's going to go that direction. He plays his cards early on. Even if you've never seen a movie trailer for it or anything, that Nicholson is going to crack. He almost calls it and tells you that's how the movie's going to end, which is something that upsets me about the plot.
I'll disagree a little bit. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Colonel Jessup is going to crack on the stand. I think the moment I knew he was going to crack is when Tom Cruise's character disrespects him and tells him to sit down.
Right. I didn't release you yet.
As a viewer, you should know at that point what Tom Cruise's character is up to.
It's going to get interesting from then on.
And he's got him rattled now because Tom Cruise's character he's probably the best written character. See, and this is why this movie's tough for me, because you never really get the sense of just how shrewd of a lawyer he really is until he starts playing the chess match in the courtroom. And then you see how he moves the pieces around to get what he wants. And you realize then that everything that you think was a mistake that he had made up to that point, like when he was at Guantanamo Bay, he knew he didn't need any other information because he knew exactly from that moment how he was going to target Jessup. And Demi Moore's character realizes that when she says, you knew that when you asked him for the transfer order, because he wanted to see how he was going to react just by asking for that transfer order. it's that sort of thing that is lost as far as the movie goes. What makes it a better play than a movie is because the movie needs to show more of that he's a lot smarter than what he's letting on.
I don't know. I don't know if I agree with you on that, Ted, because right at the beginning of the movie when he's practicing, he has that encounter about the guy who thought he was buying marijuana, but it was oregano.
Oregano, that's classic.
And the guy was like telling him what he's going to charge him with and what he's going to do to him. And Kathy was basically saying, well, if you do that, then I'm going to do this. I mean, he was rolling off everything that he could possibly do to him. That showed me right there what kind of intelligence he had. Right off the bat. Was he maybe a little disrespectful? Is he always late to meetings? As we hear at the beginning of the movie, his commanding officer goes, I would ask you for an excuse why you're late, but I know you don't have a good one.
But does it show that he's of the caliber to take on somebody like Jessup?
I think so, because, they tout how intelligent he is when he is trying to explain to Joe that he's the best litigator in their office. They're really, lifting him up. He's a smart guy, and I think they know that he's smart. Now, as far as he's never been in a courtroom before, he's never actually tried a case. We have to have those what-ifs. Because if we knew that he was as good as Jessup, then what fun is that? We want to see the underdog take down the big dog.
Well, obviously they picked him because they initially did not want him to go to court. They wanted a plea bargain, and they assumed he was going to take a plea bargain because that's all he does.
Right. It's all a ploy to get this out of court. Everybody from the top on down, including Kevin Bacon's character, they want this as far away from court as it can possibly get. And let's be clear, it's not a true court.
Military court.
It's a general court-martial, which a general court-martial is overseen by, I think, 8 officers of the armed service. So it's a little bit different than a traditional jury trial, but it acts very similarly. Everybody wants this because of Jessup, and he's going to be assigned, to the Joint Chiefs?
Something like that. He was up there. He's
going to get a massive appointment in Washington, D.C. They don't want this anywhere near any sort of courtroom. They want Dawson and Downey to go away as far away as they possibly can.
Right.
I think the movie, though, does establish how intelligent his character is. And you had just mentioned that he didn't have to go to Cuba to know about everything. That's why when they go in and they check the room of Santiago's, he doesn't stay in there long. That's not going to be what he needs. But everybody's questioning it. Joe's questioning him as far as, are you going to take the guided tour? And he says, I'm pacing myself.
Yeah.
So, but it's because his mind is working, especially when he has his bat. He's very, very intelligent, and I think she catches on eventually that this is a very intelligent individual that can do almost anything.
I don't doubt that he's a good lawyer, just based off of, like you said, with the scene with that completely ridiculous charge with the guy with the oregano. That's a whole nother podcast of how ridiculous that is.
Well, he thought he was buying marijuana, though.
Right.
And it is
1992. Kathy's 100% right. Stupidity is not a crime.
But maybe it should be.
You never see or get an indication of how he can manipulate the pieces on the board that he has to do. And you don't get a sense of that until he's backed into a corner, essentially. Markinson's dead, and setting up Jessup as their last shot. It almost feels too desperate. I would have liked to have seen it more where you kind of know that he's very shrewd. And we have to catch up to that. And I think that's something that could have been established better. And don't get me wrong, I like Tom Cruise's character. I'm just saying, I don't think the writing is real forthcoming with how shrewd he is. Because if you really want my opinion, I think the main catalyst character, while Kathy goes head to head with Jessup, the big catalyst in the courtroom, the catalyst for getting everything going is Demi Moore's character.
Right? Because I think actually where everything starts to heat up is when they're having lunch and they're asking him questions. And Kathy asks Jessup, if you want to give me any additional information, feel free to do so. And Jessup just basically gives him the whatever.
Yeah.
And then from there, you have Joe's asking questions as far as, what are code reds and stuff like that. And you could see he's getting irritated. He's getting mad. In fact, he basically starts ripping on Joe about her being a female and being in the position that she's in.
He pulls a Harvey Weinstein on her, and basically he sexually harasses her.
he's unraveling and he's seeing that. And then that's why I believe he asked for the transfer orders. And then he saw the reaction again. So I think we're already seeing bits and pieces here of what's leading up to the end. Sometimes we have to go back to see how this all build up. I think there's more there than you both are kind of alluding to. I think there's a lot of setup that he's doing. And so by the end, you have that payoff. It doesn't automatically just show up.
I'm not saying there isn't setup. There is clearly setup, and I think the lunch they have with Jessup is a clear indication of what kind of character Colonel Jessup is. But I think that it drags. There are many points where they can really turn this into a more courtroom drama style that has more significance, more skin in the game, more teeth. It just has that area of the movie where it just kind of like, just drags and drags and drags. And then once you get into the courtroom, it really kind of picks up a little bit, and then it hits that high note.
So I don't think it drags at all. I mean, I understand what you mean by the end, the courtroom. It does pick up. Like you had said, the end is one of the greatest scenes that you ever seen.
It is.
On film.
It is.
And it's hard for that whole film to be at that pace at the end there. So I don't think it drags really at all. In fact, I think the dialogue actually allows it to move pretty good, I think. Tom Cruise does a great job with this character. You want him to win. They develop that. And then you have the dialogue between him and Nicholson, but then also him and Joe. I just think that the writing and the dialogue is really good. And then you have the confrontation between Kaffee and Dawson. Dawson and Kaffee don't like each other because they don't understand each other very well.
Dawson lives by a code. He lives by the Marine Code, and which is a code of honor. And Kaffee does not live by that same code.
Kaffee also, let's not forget, he's never been to trial before.
To be honest, he really didn't want to be a part of the armed services. He's there not to serve his country. And that's pointed out by a few different people.
By Joe.
Yeah. And Dawson and Downey both have that level of commitment and honor that he doesn't have. I mean, of course, they aren't going to see eye to eye, but I think one of the most interesting confrontations that I think is well written, Eric, you said that things drag, what there could have been more of, and we could see this interaction of how Kaffee's playing people. I loved every interaction that Tom Cruise's character Kaffee had with Kiefer Sutherland's character.
Yes, exactly.
Hardened as what Jessup is. Kiefer Sutherland's character...
He's a clone. He's a clone of Jessup.
He is dangerous.
He's a weasel.
He's a dangerous psychopath.
Yes.
Is what he is.
Yeah.
He's even more dangerous, I think, than Jessup is. Because if he continues on his path, people are going to die. He's going to do something. He's brainwashed completely. He's out of his mind. And he's evil. You can tell he enjoyed issuing those code reds.
Oh, yeah.
If he's not in the Marines, he's a possible serial killer.
I can see that.
That's how psychotic he really is. And Kiefer Sutherland plays a great role there. To what Eric was saying, I think more interactions with that character would have been better. Or had we seen more interactions on the Guantanamo Bay base, which ironically wasn't shot in Cuba, it was shot in California.
Shocking.
Because the military disavowed any connection to the movie.
And they're not going to let a film crew onto Guantanamo Bay. Come on.
You'd be surprised. Ultimately, what we're getting at here is Aaron Sorkin. Aaron Sorkin is a brilliant writer. I mean, you look at his body of work through Moneyball, The Social Network. His most recent, The Trial of Chicago 7, is probably going to be nominated for an Academy Award.
TV series, The Newsroom, West Wing, Sports Night.
Right.
The man has a spotless record of genius.
And this movie, even being his first writing credit, the dialogue here is good. Yeah. It's just there's some aspects of this that could have been better.
So is that on Aaron Sorkin or is that on Rob Reiner?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. Yeah. If you go in understanding that it's a play, you understand more of the pacing and why it doesn't do other things. But ultimately, like Eric said, it has to come through on a movie. And I think it's perfectly paced as a play. It's just, it lacks a little bit as a movie as far as the pacing goes.
This was a Tony-winning play, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it comes down to that final 20 minutes.
Yes. That
final 20 minutes... You have the speech or whatever you want to call it, a soliloquy or whatever, at the end that Jack Nicholson gives is so well written. It's almost perfect. You couldn't ask for anything better. There's no way anybody could make an hour and 45-minute movie that has that intensity. There's just no way. I challenge you to come up with a movie that has that intensity the entire movie. Let's face it, the viewer would be wore out by the time the movie was over. That's where I'm torn on the movie because I like it a lot. Don't get me wrong. I just think that there are some areas where it could be paced a little bit better.
I still think it's a pretty good paced film, but I think maybe less of Kathy and Joe going back and forth a little bit. They tried to like
that's what needs to be cut out. She's a catalyst of the movie.
Maybe it's a little too much of them going back and forth and not enough, as you said. Maybe you would like to see a little bit more of Kiefer Sutherland in the movie as Kendrick. Maybe you want to see a little bit more of him in the movie. The problem is they try to allude some type of romance in there, but they don't cross the line. But they flirt across the line a little bit. He talks about her perfume. They go out on a date. Is that a date? I think you're asking me out for a date. So it's stuff like that don't think they really need.
Some of the dialogue hasn't aged well. We'll put it that way as well. There's a massive attitude toward women in a position of authority in this movie that, wow,
you gotta take it with a grain of salt, though. It's 1992.
It's borderline misogynistic.
Let's look at it this way. So when Kathy says, well, I'm sexually aroused, Commander, is he being sexist or is he treating her as an equal? Because let's say that it was a man.
Not an equal.
Let's say it was a man. Would he belittle somebody else? He has done it throughout the whole film, even to his own boss when he walks in late. He doesn't seem to be prepared. He doesn't seem to care. He seems to be belittling his own boss, who's a male. I think it's part of his character just to be that way. Should he said what he said? Of course not. He shouldn't have said that to her. That's bad. It's really bad. But it's also in his character, I think, to treat everybody kind of like that.
He's sarcastic.
Yeah, he's very sarcastic.
Very sarcastic.
There's a fine line between sarcasm. I don't even know what you want to call it. It's borderline misogynistic. Like I said, it doesn't cross the line nearly as much as what Jack Nicholson's character does. In today's Army or Marines, he says something like that in front of witnesses, his career's over. Let's be perfectly honest.
Sure. Absolutely.
Without a shadow of a doubt, hands down. Look at what happened to David Petraeus.
Yeah.
Who was the commander of the American Army Armed Forces in Afghanistan. An interview with Rolling Stone said just a couple of off-color things, not nearly as inflammatory as what Jessup says. And his career was over. He was ousted within a week. Like I said, it was hardly even anything in comparison. Some of the dialogue is a little rough.
But I have to go back to what Eric said. This is 1992, 93.
Baby.
This is the time being. So if you're saying it's outdated, then everything will always be outdated because things change and things move on and develop into something else. But I think in this particular case, my biggest problem with that scene is not what Jessup says to Joe, but that the fact that nobody comes to her rescue. Does she need it, though? She kind of gives him that look like, I've been here before. This is nothing new that I haven't heard.
I wonder how Kiefer Sutherland's character would have interacted with her. And Kathy is dismissive of her. When they're getting to the base, he says to Noah Wiley's character who's driving the Jeep,
nobody likes her.
Nobody likes her. It automatically dismissive.
Well, she's been dismissive to him throughout this whole process, trying to get him replaced.
Here again, we don't establish how shrewd he is. She has to learn like we do as being a legal mind.
And that's a good thing.
What he does while he's playing softball is fine. And you sit there and you go, oh, okay, this guy kind of knows what he's doing. But do we think that he is capable of tackling a murder case where two men's lives are literally on the line?
He doesn't think he is early on.
Well, he already thinks that they're guilty. He hasn't really even thought about...
She has a reason to dismiss him and be very leery of him.
But again, it comes back to what I said earlier. He is somebody who has plea bargained his whole life.
33 out of 34?
44, and I think he's got one more left and he gets the steak knives. Here's the thing is, he has always succeeded doing that type of job. If this character came in as somebody who was known to get people found not guilty of things like murder and stuff like that, would I care as much? I want to root for an underdog. Why would I think he's the underdog if he is somebody who's like the best at what he does in murder cases? I like the fact that he's not tried one. I like the fact that he's smart. And I like the fact that Joe has to get on him for everything because he is only, 1 year out of law school and 9 months with the JAG Corps. And I do like I said, that relationship with him and Joe, because Joe at times gets on his case, but then after a while reminds him of how good he is, to the point where she even warns him at the end, if you don't feel like you can get Jessup, don't do it. Even though up to that point, she's been like hitting him over the head saying, you need to go after Jessup.
Well, she realizes that they're risking their careers. I mean, at that point. And you had mentioned this, I don't even know how to describe it. It's because it's not a love thing. Those are scenes that could have been cut out. There's no place for it. And I think it almost hurts her character. If they wanted them to hang out outside of that, they didn't have to do it that way.
It could have been something as simple as all three of them are hanging out together and maybe Sam leaves and they're just talking. And then that conversation happens about how much she is impressed by him. It doesn't have to be, let's go out on a date or something like that to get seafood. It could have just been more natural of something that they're working hard together. Sam has to go home and then they're just continuing the conversation. So we've been talking a little bit about those interactions. The two main characters here, and I would say, at least in my opinion, are Kaffee and Jessup. So what is your opinion of Tom Cruise's portrayal of Kaffee?
I think he's great.
Yeah, I like Tom Cruise.
I think Tom Cruise plays the character as well as it could be played. Because if you're sitting here thinking in 92, I don't know who else could have played Kaffee. I mean, it is kind of a quintessential Tom Cruise role for the mid to late 80s to the early 90s. Because essentially he's playing a similar character to Maverick in Top Gun, but with better writing, obviously. He pulls off that cocky but relatable character really well. I mean, it's quite obvious Tom Cruise can deliver a really good performance. We had talked about him in Jerry Maguire before. He's going to be looked at as one of the best actors of that generation.
I almost feel like he's underappreciated as an actor. And maybe it's now because of the Mission Impossible movies and the Jack Reacher movies and that horrible The Mummy movie. But I'm thinking with all these action movies that he's done in recent years that we all forget how great of an actor he is. And I kind of actually miss him doing more of this type of stuff. I would love to have seen maybe not necessarily a sequel to A Few Good Men, but something where he plays an older lawyer. Aaron Sorkin dialogue. I would love to see him in that type of setting again. What's your feelings on that, Eric?
Do you think that Scientology has anything to do with Tom Cruise's career? Maybe not being where it should be? I mean, let's be honest.
I mean, he's still a big name. I mean, he still is bringing in money. He's just not doing the roles that he once did.
Tom Cruise is still a power broker, in my opinion, in Hollywood. I hate to say this, but when you look at some of the decisions he was making as far as scripts go, when he was with Nicole Kidman, you could see that he took a lot more chances as far as his acting. And then his post-divorce from her has been a lot of these cookie-cutter roles. I don't know if it's that, maybe it's that influence, but I don't know if the church has anything to do with it, if you want to call it a church.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his earlier roles, they are definitely more straightforward actor portrayal movies where you're right, he's doing these cookie cutter Mission Impossibles, Tropic Thunder, Jack Reachers, which he's very good in Jack Reacher, don't get me wrong.
Actually, Tropic Thunder is that's a fun thing. I actually like him in that kind of
I actually kind of,
I like to see more of that type of thing. I kind of like him in the Mission Impossible movies and all that. But what I'm just saying is that...
do other things too.
Right. I like to see him do some other stuff because I think he's more gifted than we give him credit for. And I think that's because we haven't really seen him do this type of thing in the last maybe 15 years.
Think about, okay, during this time period, just looking at some of his history, Tom Cruise in 92 was probably the hottest male actor there was. Let's see, in 92, A Few Good Men. He did Far and Away in 92. Days of Thunder in 90. Born on the 4th of July in 89. Rain Man in 88. Cocktail in 88. Top Gun and Color of Money in 86. The man was a powerhouse every year with movies. The Firm in 93. Interview with a Vampire. The list keeps going on.
There you go. Interview with the Vampire. That did it.
That was The Fall of Grace. It wasn't Mission Impossible in 96. Okay. All right.
No, I think Interview with the Vampire right there. And I don't know if you guys ever seen that movie, but
I like that movie.
You like that movie?
All right.
You were a 16-year-old girl at the time too, right?
He was a vampire.
He's a guaranteed hit.
Yes.
Talk about the Scientology aspect of Tom Cruise. I think it actually hurt his standing with the general public for a while because, the whole jumping on the seat thing
At
with
Oprah,
Oprah.
yeah.
There for a while, people thought he was legitimately like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Oh, sure.
All of the controversy surrounding the church, and like I said, I use that in the loosest term possible. He's kind of been...
He is protected from any
Yeah,
controversy.
he's not associated with any of the real
They
controversial
do
things.
that on purpose, not to get all Scientology on you, but I've watched many a documentary on that church, and I use that term loosely as well, too. It's a cult. Who are we trying to kid? If I offend any Scientologists out there, I'm sorry, Kirstie Alley. Yes, they protect him because he is a cash cow, and that cult is built on money, and Tom Cruise is their cash cow. There is nothing that they are going to do. They're not going to drag him into anything. He is Teflon. It's going to bounce off him. He is gold to them.
There are some people where it has stuck. There's some members of that organization,
but they are not at that kind of a caliber.
They're not
Tom
at that
Cruise,
level. Right. Or Travolta.
Travolta. Those are your big ones.
But let's look at when he did divorce from Nicole Kidman, and then when he hooked up with Katie Holmes. People were actually questioning his sexual orientation at that time. So as far as being protected by the church, I don't think he was that protected.
You underestimate their spin machine.
Yeah.
No. Nobody wanted Tom Cruise at that particular time because like you said, he was crazy. People were saying that he was either gay or he couldn't
mentally
unstable,
get it up. But he bounced back, and he bounced back fast.
Yeah, he has bounced back from that. He's still a power broker. When those Mission Impossible movies come out, they're still making $100 million the first weekend.
And they're doing a seventh one, I hear. It's in filming. Right. Incredible.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise is a guy. He is a great actor. He does his own stunts in a lot of these. He is very charming. Every interview I've seen with him, except for obviously the bouncing on the couch with Oprah, he is very charming. He doesn't talk about Scientology. He talks about his movies. He seems like a guy you would really like to hang out with. In A Few Good Men, I would say he is an incredible actor. He did a great job in this. He really did.
I mean, he's at the height of his powers.
Sure.
Out of the whole brat pack, it wasn't until Marvel took Robert Downey Jr. in that Robert Downey Jr. became a megastar. Tom Cruise was the most successful brat pack actor out there.
I can remember the first movie I saw with Tom Cruise was The Outsiders. Incredible cast of nobodies in 1983.
I wouldn't even consider him like part of the Brat Pack, though, to be honest with you, because he really never really did a lot of those movies with those actors. I mean, I saw him in Taps with Timothy Hutton.
Yeah.
He was already like a bona fide star with Risky Business and Top Gun.
All the Right Moves.
So I think he was already separated from that group already by that time. As far as Robert Downey Jr., I mean, you still had like someone like John Cusack who was in those movies, but he was kind of a younger version of that. I don't know. I don't know if I would say that he was part of that Brat Pack club. We talked about Tom Cruise and his acting, and I know how Ted feels about Jack Nicholson in general. But how do we feel about his portrayal of Colonel Jessup?
I don't know how Ted feels about Jack Nicholson in general, and I don't know if our listening people do. How do you feel about Jack Nicholson?
Jack Nicholson is awesome.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
In general, because we've talked about Jack Nicholson over in The Shining.
Yeah.
And so we went in detail about how much Ted likes Jack.
Yeah, Jack Nicholson's awesome. The moment he gets on screen, he commands the screen. And this is one of those few roles after The Shining where I honestly believe when I've watched the movie, this time when I was preparing for the podcast, I tried to watch this with the eye, is Jack being Jack or is he being the character? I wanted to find and see if I could make that distinction. I think this is one of the few roles, there's a handful of them, where he's not playing Jack here. He's actually embodying a role. Because I think Jessup is supposed to be this larger-than-life badass, for lack of a better term, that doesn't give a shit about anybody.
Which is clearly set up in the opening scene of the movie.
Exactly.
Clearly right there.
This guy has one thing on his mind. It's advancement at any cost. He loves the Marines, but he's willing to sacrifice somebody to get there. I told Ken this before we started recording. The best way to describe Colonel Jessup, he's the logical extension of Tom Berenger's character in Platoon. if Sergeant Barnes hadn't been killed at the end of Platoon. This guy is an evil bastard who has one thing on his mind, and that is his own advancement, his own protection, and he's going to step on and, in some cases, hurt other people that are any sort of an impediment to him getting what he wants.
And again, I go back to that opening scene where he's talking with Lieutenant Colonel Markinson.
Yeah.
And right at the end of that opening scene, he's like, we grew up together. We went to school together. We went to Vietnam together. And for some reason, your career has not gone as mine has. And he pretty much lays his cards out on the table and says, you know what? I don't give a shit.
He is perfectly terrifying.
Yes.
He's a different kind of terrifying than Kiefer Sutherland's character.
He's an older version of Kiefer. Kiefer Sutherland is Jessup in 10 or 15 years.
I don't think that Jessup is a psychopath like Kiefer Sutherland.
I think he is. I think he is. I mean, you were just talking about Barnes from Platoon. At least with Barnes, when somebody that he cared about died, it set him off. I think there's no redeeming qualities to Jessup whatsoever. At least he doesn't show it. And I think that's the reason why Jack Nicholson is here to play that over-the-top evil guy. He doesn't have a redeeming quality. So that's the difference between, I think, someone like Barnes and Jessup. I think Barnes has a little bit of a redeeming quality because when he saw somebody they cared for get killed, you saw it in his face and what he was going through. You don't see that thing. And same thing with Kiefer Sutherland in his performance here is he's asked to play a guy with no redeeming qualities. The bad guys here have no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And I'll lump the doctor to that three-headed monster here because the doctor, all he cares about is covering his own butt because he may have put somebody with a clean bill of health, doesn't really truly have a clean bill of health.
He got Santiago killed.
He's probably the ultimate bad guy in this movie because if he does his job right, everybody's happy. No one dies.
No one is going to cross Nathan Jessup. No one.
Nobody would cross him, but I'm just saying the doctor, didn't do his job, and if he would have done his job, then everything would have been hunky-dory.
And you could see him kind of squirming on the stand when the questioning was getting a little harder. I mean, you got to love Christopher Guest.
But this is a role for Jack. There are some obvious roles where he is just playing himself. I don't think this is one of those roles. This is him where he can dial himself up to 11.
Well played.
And get to another level. Ken's not the biggest Jack Nicholson fan, but Jack is a good actor. He knows how to dial it up, but he can also dial it down. There's a couple of roles that I can think of. One is about Schmidt, where he dials himself back. He's definitely not Jack.
How can you not like Jack Nicholson, Ken?
No, I like him fine. I just don't think he's as good as, let's say, like a Tom Hanks.
Two different, totally personalities.
And I know it's two different personalities. Like, for instance, here, he's a hired hand to come in and give a Jack performance. It's an over-the-top performance. It doesn't have layers. There's just one layer, and it's in your face. So as far as the performance, it's great because that's what we need to call it like a great acting job. I don't know if I would go that far because dialing it to 11 and he doesn't have to take it down at any particular time. He just keeps it at 11.
There are layers to Jessup. You see how he connives and manipulates people.
In that particular way, yes, but you don't see, does he get sad? Does he care for people?
No, he cares for no one. He does care for somebody. He cares for himself.
But that's it. That's all you see is somebody, he has one thing in mind, and that's advancing his career, and that's it. There's no layers to that. There's just one thing. You don't see, like I said, with the Barnes character in Platoon, you at least see that he does get hurt emotionally because of something bad happens. You don't see it here. And that's not an attack on Jack. That's just how the script is written for him.
That's a knock then on Aaron Sorkin. But I think Jack does he's not showing the wide range of emotions throughout the course of the movie, but he does know when to turn it on and turn it off. Because, I mean, he's a completely different type of evil when he's talking to J.T. Walsh's Lieutenant Colonel Markinson. It's a different kind of evil because they're both Marines. So, of course, he's going to talk to him. In fact, I will actually say that J.T. Walsh's performance of Lieutenant Colonel Markinson is more layered because he has to show that he is strong in front of his own guy.
I would have liked to learn more about Lieutenant Walsh's character.
That's one of those characters that's lost. And this is where we run into the conflict between a movie and a play. Whereas Markinson's character serves a perfect role for a play, something gets lost when it gets onto the big screen. We run into that with a few of the characters, one being Markinson, another being Kiefer Sutherland's character, even Kevin Pollak's character, kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Sam actually even says that now that Joe's on board, what am I supposed to do here? To be perfectly honest with you guys, once Joe is the co-counselor,
It was a meta statement before they knew what meta was.
he kind of semi-disappears once that happens, because now Joe is his confidant. Granted, Sam does give him encouragement with take you any day of the week and twice on Sunday, and he told him how well he did against, late into Kendrick. Was his character even necessary? Probably not. We were talking about this a little bit off air. That character could have been portrayed by Jason Alexander from Seinfeld if it wasn't for the fact that season 2 got picked up for Seinfeld. Kevin Pollak was actually working on another sitcom with Rob Reiner, and it wasn't going well. And Reiner said that if season 2 of Seinfeld, if it does get picked up, do you want the role for Sam? And he said, yeah. So he was hoping that Seinfeld got picked up. There's a lot of good actors here that I feel like there's just not enough meat on the bone from them. And, J.T. Walsh, we're just talking about him in Markinson. Great actor, died way too young.
Way too young. Yeah.
And his character could have been expanded more. But we talk about this pacing, but whenever I say, well, let's remove some of the dialogue between Kathy and Joe and stuff like that, we're like, well, no, we shouldn't do that. Where do we move it from? I don't know. I enjoy the film immensely. But like I said, some of these great actors, even Kevin Bacon, I love it every time Kevin Bacon's character shows up in the movie. But it's really quick. But that's because you have two main people, and that's Cruise and Nicholson. It's them, and everybody get out of the way.
They're tertiary characters. They're on the fringes. If you look at a play, you need those characters to come in and out. I think this is where it gets kind of bogged down, like I had said before. Here again, you see Rob Reiner's brilliance. We want to see more from these characters because of his casting choices here. Christopher Guest, and you have J.T. Walsh, you have Kiefer Sutherland, you have Kevin Bacon, you have Kevin Pollak. These are quality actors that provide so much more than what their character on the page says. And that's a testament to them as actors than it is to the writing of the movie.
As we stated before in The Princess Bride, Rob Reiner knows who to put in the right spots to play these characters, and I think that shows here.
Yeah, this is his wheelhouse. His wheelhouse is to put the right people in the right roles. In any other movie, that works awesome. Here, it makes us want more of those characters when there's nothing more for those characters on the page.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's hard for us to take anything away then from the two mains.
That's where my problem with this lies. Because I like the movie a lot too. But I also see the problem because I want more from these characters and it's just not there. And I have to come to the realization that the reason I want more is because these characters are inhabited by these actors that are doing a tremendous job.
They did a better job than they should have.
Exactly. And you can debate whether or not if he even should be there. You take somebody like Cuba Gooding Jr., who goes on to win an Oscar. He's not even in the movie for 2 minutes, but you're like, wow, who's that character? Or Noah Wyle, who went on to a great career in playing on ER, amongst other things. He's kind of lost here, but because he's so good, you're like, wow. And that's where I think the crux of the problem is. These are people that if you see them on stage, you don't think twice about these characters. But when you get somebody like in the hands of Rob Reiner, you get these characters. He puts these people in that are so good at their job that it makes you want more out of them. And it doesn't necessarily hurt the movie.
Maybe the question is, maybe some of those characters maybe don't even need to be in this movie because, like you said, they do such a great performance of what they do. Maybe it wants you to go somewhere that, unfortunately, the movie's not going to go to because it's going to focus on, if I'm repeating myself, the two main characters in this film. Because when it's all done, it's a boxing match or a chess match or however you want to say it between Jessup and Kathy. This is like an all-star cast. These performances are probably above pay grade. We didn't even talk about the two actors that basically are playing the defendants here. We haven't talked about Wolfgang, is it Bodison as Harold Dawson? I don't know if he does a great job here or if Tom Cruise is just...
I think he does.
It's his first acting gig.
The fact that he was Rob Reiner's assistant on Misery and he worked for Castle Rock basically almost like an errand boy or mail guy. That is amazing. He does a really good job here, I think.
Yeah, and then you have James Marshall, who's playing Downey.
From what I was reading about him, he is a Sorkin person, and I guess he's in a lot of things that Sorkin has done, either on Broadway and through plays. He's been in some other things, too, that Sorkin has done.
By the way, I thought I saw Sorkin in this movie. Am I right by
Yes.
saying at the bar?
Yes,
Yeah,
he
he's in the
was.
bar.
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
Little
that's Sorkin
cameo.
right there in the background.
Yeah, how about it, right?
Well, Sorkin originally studied to be an actor. He had no desire to be a writer. And Sorkin was saying is that one day he was left with this typewriter to hold. And then he just started typing on it and started coming up with ideas. And then all of a sudden, those ideas took off. We see Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson being these two big leads. Of all the rest of the characters that we kind of already talked about a little bit, is there a favorite character that you have outside of the top two?
Kiefer Sutherland's character, hands down, Kendrick. As much as I love Demi Moore, and don't get me wrong, I'm not crazy about her character in this movie. I mean, I think she is replaceable. I think she's interchangeable with a bevy of different actresses that could probably take her place. Nicholson, Cruise, Sutherland are just dead on. Even Kevin Pollak, which I think they could have expanded a little bit more on. Kevin Bacon, I liked as Jack Ross, as the prosecutor. I thought he did a phenomenal job with it.
Well, Kevin Bacon was originally going up for the part of Kiefer Sutherland's part.
I could see that, too.
I'm glad he didn't get it.
I'm glad he didn't get it either, but I could see him playing that character, though, too.
Yeah, his wife convinced him that he should take this other role. I kind of disagree with you a little bit on Demi Moore, but I think I would have probably, if you asked me that question years back, I might have kind of agreed with you. But from watching it over and over again, I think she does a really good job with her character. Could other actresses play that part? Probably so, but I think the way that the looks and mannerisms, she gives Kathy a hard time.
She does.
She just seems so whiny.
But her character is the third best written character in the show.
But she's not the third best actor in the movie.
I do think she does a good job, put it this way. In the 90s, Demi Moore, my jaw would drop to the floor.
Which is probably one of the reasons why she was picked for this movie. I'm sure.
I don't think so. The reason being is because Jodie Foster was rumored to have almost had this role.
And why did not Jodie Foster get the role?
Demi Moore went to Rob
she
Reiner
did the screening test, and she went, I know.
She took a $3 million pay cut.
No, that would do it.
I like Demi Moore. I think she is an incredible actress, but I think there was so much more they could have done with this character. I did not like the fact that they were doing a pseudo love interest between them, where they were kind of hinting towards it, but of course it never really alluded that way, just kind of hinting towards the movie. You know what? You either do it or you don't do it. And I just didn't like the fact that they were kind of putting her character into that realm. I think she would have been better portrayed as I don't want to say a feminist, but I want to say as a more hardcore attorney. She was the character who was so set on defending these two guys.
First of all, she's not a sex object in this movie at all. They don't make her look...
I did not say so.
Well, you said that the reason why she got the job was because she was a
in 1992. She was a hot commodity. You're not going to put you are not going to put a no-name actress in that position.
No, but at the same time, she's not being hired though for her sex appeal. Whereas other movies, that's what she had going for her at that particular time.
I didn't say that. I never said that.
I think she does very well with the character. Her character is very strong. I think the way the character is written, and they talk about this at the beginning, she's great at doing her job, but she's not a trial lawyer. But she wants to be a trial lawyer. She wants so badly to be as good as Kathy. She has that desire, but she doesn't have his talent. But she's really good at getting into somebody's face and making them do their job.
He forces him to use his talent.
Right. And so I really appreciated her. You know, after all these years of watching this movie, I've grown to actually like her more.
We can agree to disagree. I think she's a little whiny in this movie. I really do.
Do you see that, Ted? Is she whiny?
I don't necessarily think so. She's fighting an uphill battle. Just look at how she's treated. It can't be easy for her. She has to be brash. She has to be...
Yeah.
She has to be in your face.
Yes,
because
I agree. I didn't see it. I saw when she was in your face trying to make her arguments, it just was kind of wishy-washy.
I've said I hate the fact that they tried to do the whole love thing, but then I don't like that she doesn't fight back at Kathy when he's drunk. And when he gets in her face and he screams at
Yeah,
her
he just walks
and
out.
calls
Yeah.
and calls her galactically stupid,
Yes.
I wish she would have
Slapped him.
punched him.
Something. Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
what I was looking for. A
Or
strong character.
or stood up for herself there.
But you're not going to win an argument with the drunk, and I think that's why her character
You
walks
don't
out.
need
I
to
mean,
win. You don't need to win the argument. You need to show.
He needs to be put in his place.
Yeah, you need
for
to
being
show.
for being an a-hole.
Right.
Being an asshole. He's just doing it just to be an asshole too.
And Weinberg's not saying anything. He's just sitting there listening.
Like he does most of the movie.
Pretty much. Yeah.
yeah, but I think he tries to support her up to that point. Let's put it this way. She does mess up a number of times. She makes the doctor look like an expert by getting the court to agree. He defends that because Sam goes after her and he defends her. But then she doesn't prepare the witness well to the point where, of course, it's detrimental. If this was real life, that case would have been over because it looks like Dawson told a fib to get him on board to murder Santiago. I understand what you guys are saying to a certain extent, but he's drunk. Marcuson just died. The case is falling apart. Yeah, would we like to have seen her put in his place? Yes. But at the same time, I think walking away from a fight with a drunk is probably the best way to go at that particular time. And let cooler heads come back, and then, he eventually says he's sorry, and she gets what she wants. He's going to put Jess up on the stand.
That's also a troubling jump.
A predictable, troubling jump.
Some of these jumps are kind of crazy.
As a courtroom drama, if it wasn't for those last 20 minutes, this wouldn't be a good courtroom drama, in my opinion. Even though I guess AFI named it the number 5 courtroom drama movie in that genre. Number 1, of course, is 12 Angry Men, which I can't argue with. There's some leaps here. It's borderlines on almost too much. I don't see any reality in where they put Colonel Jessup on the stand, especially when they have nothing. Because we have to remember, these 2 Marines' lives are on the line. And essentially, Caffey and Galloway are playing poker with these guys' lives. And now, don't get me wrong, there is some of that in a normal defense case. Okay, there is some of that has to happen. But these lawyers are almost reckless in how they're taking these 2 guys' lives.
What would you want them to do there? Okay, so Markinson dies. They found out that when the order was given, both cadets weren't even in the room. So what are they going to do now?
Do you want the reality?
You can't handle reality.
So you're saying that you have a problem with it because they're risking their lives now. They're already to the point where they're in too deep. There's nothing more you can do now. It's not like you can plea bargain now.
See, that's the thing. If we're talking reality, this case never sees the inside of a courtroom.
Right, because they would have plea bargained this out.
Because Caffey's right. It's not good for the movie or the drama of the movie. Mm-hmm. Caffey's right. 12 years, they're getting off light. He might have been able to negotiate it down even a little bit further. One of the movies is a guilty pleasure of mine, and it is the worst courtroom manipulation I can remember in movies, and that's A Time to Kill.
I just saw that a couple days ago.
When Matthew McConaughey's character, when he does his summation, that is one of the most manipulative courtroom things ever in movie history. And it's completely unrealistic. What I'm saying is these guys, they're going to serve time. Guys like Jessup, they don't get caught for doing stupid stuff like this.
And they don't even get involved. If you were accused of a crime, a murder, nonetheless, and you knew for a fact you were not guilty, you're saying that you're going to take whatever plea bargain is and you're going to serve that 12 years or whatever the case may be? Well, that's what the movie, though, says. Dawson doesn't want to plea bargain because he feels that he didn't do anything wrong. He felt like he was following orders. So is the movie wrong saying that because you have a character like Dawson who says, I didn't do it?
Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that the odds that they're putting, as far as the case goes, there's one thing to be David and Goliath. It's a completely different thing to be the Titanic and the iceberg.
But that's what all movies are about, though. The movies are about overcoming that iceberg.
Overcoming the iceberg. I love it.
Except the movie Titanic, right?
Wait till the sequel.
What, Raise the Titanic?
Yeah, Raise the Titanic. Yeah. The Wrath of the Titanic.
The problem is they put the bar that they're legally going to have to get over to convince anybody that these guys didn't kill anybody, that they didn't murder this kid. I don't think they murdered him.
I think they murdered him.
No, they didn't. They had no idea
Manslaughter.
that this guy had a medical condition. See, there's so much here. Now, granted, we have to look at the case, but see, this is where in appeal now in today's day and age could be looked at. But you have to look at it through the lens of the court. There is no way that the evidence shows that these two men murdered this kid. What happened to him was it was in the process of doing something else in which he then died. That is not murder. I know that sounds convoluted, but as far as the law goes, that is not murder. Like Eric said, this is manslaughter at best.
I mean, if you want to go legal terms, I guess you're right by saying manslaughter, but murder is murder. If you are the cause of somebody dying.
They weren't the cause. The cause was, his cause of death was lactic acidosis.
Which was brought upon by somebody shoving a rag into his mouth.
I thought the rag was
too deep.
poisoned.
But there's no intent. Yeah, there's no intent.
I understand there's no intent, and that's why I agree with the legal term of it. But they did contribute to this man dying. There is a part of them that is at fault for this man dying.
Then you're saying they were mischarged.
Yes.
They were charged incorrectly. And ultimately, what they're found guilty of, in reality, is something that doesn't exist. What they're playing off of is conduct unbecoming of an officer. They were enlisted men. They were not officers. There is something called conduct unbecoming of a Marine, but it's not something that would be tried in a general court-martial, which was what was occurring here. Because there's various forms of court-martial. These kids should never have been tried. Because here's the thing. Even as we said that the doctor is ultimately the bad guy here, because he should have never put Santiago out there to begin with, knowing that he had a medical condition. All of that sort of thing would come out in a real court of law. It would have come on an appeal. They put Caffey and Galloway, they said, okay, here is Mount Everest. You'd have to jump over it. Everything that they piled up in front of them, it's not believable that they would have come to the conclusion after their star witness dies, they completely screw up one of their defendants' cross-examinations, which is borderline inexcusable. The fact that these two are legal minds, the fact that they didn't know that he wasn't in the room when the order was given, that is inexcusable on every level. And Caffey, he should have been yelling at himself as much as he should have been yelling at Demi Moore's character.
Or Sam.
It's all three of their faults. They should have lost the case right there. There's no logical way that you look at this and you have that screw up, and then you have your star witness commit suicide. There is no way you come to the logical conclusion that I'm just going to set fire to my entire career and put a colonel where I could be court-martialed for falsely accusing somebody of a crime. You don't come to that conclusion. At that point, the defense would pretty much just rest. And that goes to the whole point. The way everything was set up in front of them, I don't know how you take it to court.
Then you can't really make a movie of this.
This is based off of a true story. And the true story is it happened at Guantanamo Bay. There was a code red that was issued. 10 Marines hurt a fellow Marine, and he came very close to dying. It took a miraculous effort by the doctors at 6 different hospitals to save the guy's life.
Which we would rip on if it was a movie like that, because we would not believe that would take 6 different hospitals to save his life.
And these 10 guys, they went through the legal system. Caffey, he's a combination of the 3 lawyers who worked the majority of these cases for these defendants. But most of these didn't go to trial. For everything that I read, they were plea bargain, and he argued in the sentencing phase. These lawyers argued there that they shouldn't have been charged with, attempted murder. Because ultimately, the charging of murder is, I don't know enough about military law to be able to say that whether or not that they should have been charged with murder. These 2 guys, yes, are they morally responsible? Yes. And if you want to go that route, there is a moral portion of this that is in the Marines, where a person can disregard a direct order if it's deemed, if it's deemed illegal. You can make the case that they should have ignored that order. But here's the thing. If they ignore that order, what are the repercussions based off of what Kendrick and Jessup are going to do to them?
We saw that earlier in the film. They talk about, is it the Bell case? He gave food to somebody that was on water and vitamin restrictions.
And they withheld his promotion.
They withheld his promotion. So they were already showing that if you're going to have a moral issue with anything that we tell you to do, you're going to pay the price. And that's why they went to him to do the code red, is because they knew that he was already set up to have to do it. If they brought this to somebody else, they might have said, I'm not going to do that. But they already knew that they had set this up, that he was primed for the situation, which leads me to our next two questions as we're starting to wind down towards the end. Was Jessup right in not transferring Santiago? And then on top of that, using the code red? We'll go with Eric. I haven't heard from him in a while.
Jessup, if he voluntarily transferred, that shows weakness on his end. He knows that in a courtroom, if he had says, yes, of course, or in a private conversation, yes, of course, we did. And obviously he lied at that lunch and said that he did have a transfer. That's just skillfully covering up what he feels is right. He's never going to transfer anyone that shows weakness. He's an old school Marine. He obviously believes in Code Red. Do I feel it's right? No, of course not. It's not right to beat the hell out of anyone, especially a weaker person. And your convicted people there, Downey and was it Bosun? Totally drawing a blank here on his name.
Dawson and Downey.
At the end, they realized, they're like, what we did was wrong. We ganged up on a person who could not fight for himself. And they were kind of a little bit blinded by their code, as it was literally beat into them probably their whole life, as you are a Marine. You do not say anything against an order that is given to you. And I like the last scene of the movie where he's walking out and he says, you don't have to have stripes on your uniform to have respect, which really shows, what you did was right in this instance, admitting that taking orders blindly is obviously not the smartest thing to do. Jessup has to be as he is. He's going to order the code red. He's going to lie. He's going to cover up. He's got that power to do it. Like Ted said, whatever he has to do to get ahead, he's going to do. He's going to step on whatever he needs to do to show that he has the ultimate power. In this movie, he's the ultimate bully.
What do you think, Ted?
Jessup's fighting a war that doesn't exist. Because, like Eric said, he says it shows weakness. Let's be perfectly honest. In 1992, we're talking about like right around the time that Operation Desert Storm was ending. I mean, they even make a reference to it while they were eating the lunch at the base about the Iraqis who surrendered to the CNN news team.
Yeah.
They make reference to it there. But Jessup is fighting a Cold War. The Cold War is over by this point. Russia is not a threat, and you can debate all day how big of a threat Cuba really was at all. But saying that transferring Santiago off of the base is going to get people killed, he's as delusional as he is power hungry. He's fighting ghosts. He should have transferred Santiago off the base. He should have demanded that the doctor take a look at him. But see, that's not his duty. When Santiago is coming up lame and gets himself knocked out, he goes through bouts of exhaustion. That's Kendrick's responsibility to get him the medical attention that he needs. That's why I'm saying that Kendrick is a psychopath and he doesn't care who lives or dies. He's a killer, straight up.
Wouldn't you say, though, the whole system is a killer? Because if you think about it...
Now you're going back into Full Metal Jacket territory.
Yeah, a little bit. Because if you think about it, how did he even get to be a private first class? How did he get through basic training with all these conditions that he has already? Because these conditions didn't just automatically appear. He must have had these conditions beforehand.
In defense, sometimes these symptoms can be brought on. Because let's face it, Cuba and Guantanamo Bay, that is an extreme environment as far as the environment in which they're living. It could have exasperated other underlying conditions. But you're right, it should have been caught earlier in this whole process. The problem is, this is Kendrick's responsibility. Jessup, when he's made aware of who Santiago is when Santiago's already went above him to get an investigation completed by the Navy investigators to look into a shooting incident. If anybody needs to be charged with anything here, it's the discharge of a weapon into enemy territory unlawfully. You want to talk about illegality as far as military goes. That is huge.
Did Dawson do it, by the way?
He never denied that he didn't.
No, he looks like he's guilty. Well, he says that his counterpart engaged, but based on the facial expressions.
That's ridiculous. I think they
Yeah.
were jerking around and shot across. Santiago is not Jessup's responsibility. It's Kendrick's responsibility. Kendrick can go to Jessup and ask him how to handle a particular situation, but then he's going to show weakness about not knowing how to handle the situation.
What if Kendrick already handled the situation and
He
said,
did.
"I'm sorry,
He
you're going."
doesn't care.
Why? Because he doesn't want to transfer him.
Kendrick is a psychopath. He has no human feeling towards other people. He does not care. He does not care whether or not Santiago lives or dies. That's perfectly clear. He doesn't care whether anybody lives or dies. The problem is that Santiago should have been transferred off of the base.
Why should he be transferred out the base?
Why?
Yes.
Because he obviously has medical needs that are not being met. He needs to be transferred to another location where he's not in danger from a psychopath. There's a classification in the military, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, about a person who's nuts.
Don't focus on Kendrick. What about the sergeant that pushes him down the hill? What about him? It's not just Kendrick here. And what about every person that is struggling to make it in the Marines or make it in any type of armed forces? If they start saying that I can't do it, I'm struggling with fatigue or anything like that, we need to transfer them off that base as soon as possible and get them into a better situation. I don't know if you do that. And I think that's where the argument with Jessup is, if we do it for him, then we're going to have another one. And then we're going to have another one. And then soon everybody's going to be like, this is too hard for me. I want to be transferred somewhere else.
Well, then maybe he should have been discharged. Discharged, he's still going to be off of the base.
It almost sounded like he was going to be discharged. I almost felt like they went back and forth a little bit on this. Like they were talking about like he was going home, but he was going to be transferred somewhere else. I kind of got lost in what they were trying to do there. Was he going to another base? Was he going home? What were they actually doing? My thing here is that I think Jessup is right to a certain extent. That is their obligation to train him. Now, the way they trained him was probably incorrect. They probably
died.
But what I'm saying is they need to adapt their training. But actually transferring them off the base, I don't think that's probably the right thing to do.
Then he needs to be discharged from the Marines at that point then, if that's what you're saying. And then that is a very good possibility based off of his health. He probably will be medically discharged from the Marines.
You could actually say it might not even be Kendrick. It could have been his sergeant. It could have been anybody that was over him, their responsibility to say, hey, there's something medically wrong with this guy. He does go to the doctor. The doctor puts him on running restrictions, I think, for 2 weeks. Again, it goes back to the doctor. The doctor only has to say that this person isn't up to par, and all this goes away. I think we're putting too much of a responsibility on Kendrick and Jessup and all the other ones when the doctor should be the one that says, you know what?
Well, he's in full CYA mode. The doctor, by the time he gets on the stand, he's in total CYA. Cover your ass.
Right.
It's obvious he screwed up. And it's obvious that Jessup told him that Santiago was poisoned.
Well, they had that meeting. They decided to go with that to save both their butts. All of them are trying to save their butts. Maybe Kendrick, to you, is a psychopath, but maybe all of them, to a certain extent, are all psychopaths.
And now that goes back to our discussion that we had during Full Metal Jacket about the Marines in general. This isn't the first time, as far as the Code Red, that we've seen hazing on film. Full Metal Jacket, and they beat him with bars of soap wrapped in a towel.
I wonder if you would ask a Marine if like something like a Code Red is right to do or not right to do. And of course, this is just a movie, and this is all we know is by what we're told in movies and maybe personal relationships we have people in the armed forces. But you look at Jeffrey Barnes' character. He says that he wanted to give Santiago a Code Red, but he didn't do it because Dawson would kick his butt. And he seemed like to be the nicest guy in the whole room, and he wanted to give this guy a Code Red. It sounded like all the Marines believe in this Code Red based on how this movie is being portrayed.
This is where there's going to be a huge disconnect. Like Eric said, the hazing part is wrong. There's no two ways and there's no way to make it right. Here's the problem. And this is where even I have a problem. When you have a high pressure situation where these men and women are going to be going into possibly a combat situation, they have to know that that guy that's in the foxhole with them is mentally capable of handling the situation that they're in. This is a real fine line as far as what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, because the military publicly, they have come down hard on any of these instances that have made it to the public, and the punishments have been meted out severely. People have lost their careers because of some of these hazing scandals throughout the years. Are you ever going to stop it? No, it's not going to stop, because ultimately these guys and women now, it's a different mentality, and I don't think it's something that's going to go away.
One more last question for you guys. And you kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. I just want to get a straight answer. So if you were a judge, jury, sentencing, do you believe that Dawson and Downey should have been found guilty? And if so, what do you think would have been the right sentence and for the crime that they committed? What do you think, Eric?
I think they probably should have got a couple years at least. It wasn't really murder. It was maybe accidental homicide. It wasn't intentional, obviously. I'm surprised his family in the courtroom didn't make much more of a fuss at the sentencing, but I think they got off extremely light. And I think initially he was more angry that he was kicked out of the Marines, but at the end, I think he accepted it.
What's your verdict there, Ted?
With what they were charged with, they're not guilty, because they were, and I know that's brought up about the following orders. It didn't work in other cases, but they're not guilty of murder. I don't believe that at all. Even if Jessup doesn't come out and say that he issued the code red and all of that nonsense.
Let's throw out what they were charged with. Let's just, with our own thought processes, what we wanted to see happen to these guys at the end. What would your sentence been to these characters?
Well, Ted's right. They weren't charged correctly.
Basically, They got exactly what they deserved. They were dishonorably discharged. This isn't a layperson trial. This is a trial of Marines. They were dishonorably discharged. That's going to be on their record for the rest of their life. At 45, they're not going to be able to file for the benefits of somebody who has retired or been discharged from the Marines. All of the benefits they were going to have from being a Marine are gone. Plus, they're going to have the stigma going out into the private sector of being dishonorably discharged. Their punishment essentially is for life. You can ask for a pound of flesh from them at that point. I mean, they didn't do anything malicious. There was no malice in what they did. They followed normal protocol, and it just so happened because somebody else had lied, he had a medical condition that caused him to aspirate and die. I have a hard time saying that these guys need to be in prison for the rest of their life. They're already going to be punished for life.
I don't know if that punishment, now that you're saying they're going to be punished for the rest of their life, if that fits the crime, if there's no intention really to harm, but to train by orders, like you said, that's going to follow them the rest of their lives. And it's going to make it harder for them to find job and to lead a normal life. Knowing how dishonorable discharges go, there's a wide variety of how you could be discharged from the armed forces. It could have been something, as they talked about the Curtis Bell thing, maybe stealing that liquor. Maybe that would have ended up from dishonorably discharged. And then you have the same problem with somebody who did the code red.
That wouldn't have been a general. That's where the different levels of court-martial come into play.
Right. And we don't get to see that really here because it's a movie, so we don't know the levels. You're only going to know the levels if you're actually in that situation. Well, now it's time for you guys to bring your case to the court and give us your final review and grade of this movie. We'll go ahead and we'll start off with Eric.
Overall, I think the movie is very entertaining. I enjoyed it. I hadn't seen the movie in a couple years, so it was really nice to sit down. I watched it twice, once for kind of detail, and then the other to just kind of sit back and enjoy it. I did feel that the movie did drag a little bit in the middle, early to middle. I didn't like some of the lack of character building, some of the interactions that I felt should have been portrayed in the movie. The court scene at the end obviously was an A+ for me, but if you are factoring in the rest of the movie, overall, I give this a B-.
Thank you, Eric. Ted, what about you?
It's interesting, Eric. I'm torn here on this because based off of how I've talked throughout the course of the podcast, it's going to sound like I really didn't like the movie. I enjoy the movie. I can put aside a lot of the technical stuff and enjoy it. But does it rise to a level that I can give it an A? If it was based off of the last half hour of the movie, hands down, it's an A+. It's where everything else comes into play. And the movie, for me, as much as I enjoy it, it does have problems. So I have to agree with Eric. He took the words right out of my mouth with a B-. I want to give it an A. And as much as I love Tom Cruise's performance, and as much as I love Jack Nicholson's performance, and everybody else in the movie puts on just an amazing performance in this movie, it leaves me wanting it to be something more. And I just can't go there. I think that is why when this movie was nominated for Best Picture for the year it was nominated, it was one of the few movies that have been nominated for Best Picture, but not nominated for Best Screenplay. I think that says something. And so that's why I'm falling solidly on the B-, as much as that pains me, because I do love that last sequence. It's the best.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and be different from you guys. It seems like that's how I am. This is a top 10 movie for me of all time. I really enjoy this movie. I feel like the dialogue is better than what we were giving credit for, especially when we hear these speeches. Jack Nicholson's performance, even though in my opinion, it's one-sided, it's an amazing one-sided performance. You want him in this movie. You need him in this movie because he does elevate it. And Tom Cruise does the same thing. This is my favorite Tom Cruise movie. This is my favorite Tom Cruise performance. And he has some other great performances. Born on the 4th of July comes to my mind. But I think we all like underdog, fish out of water, going up against the Goliath story, and we're kind of ripping it apart for being that. I think if we, like you said, the techno babble and all the that's not realistic stuff, if we go back and just sit and then just watch the movie for just enjoyment purposes, I think it's very enjoyable. I don't think it drags because when nothing exciting is happening, there's, I think, really good dialogue here. I think all the performances are good. I do think some of the performances are even better than good or better than they should be because, like Ted said earlier, it leaves you wanting more from those characters and you almost like want a spin-off or something from it because you want to see more of them. I think that's not a bad thing. I think sometimes when we want that, we want to lower the grade of a movie because we wanted more. Wanting more after a movie is over sometimes is a good thing. I'm giving it an A. This movie is one of those movies for me that as the years have gone on, I've liked it more and more and more. If you would have asked me how this movie was 25 years ago, I probably would have said B+. And as I've gotten older, maybe it's just my likes, changing as times changed. I appreciate it. Yeah, definitely an A for me. It's just a movie, again, just like Princess Bride. Whenever it comes on, I stick with it for the rest of the movie. There's nothing in the movie that makes me go, I don't need to bother to watch this part. It's an A for me. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate y'all coming and listening to our take on A Few Good Men. Up next, for our next podcast, we'll be finishing off our Rob Reiner spotlight with the movie The American President, which is also an Aaron Sorkin written film. So we'll be focusing on that for the next time. Ted, do you have information on where people can find us on Twitter?
Yes, we can be contacted on Twitter and follow us at movie_marquee with 2 E's at the end.
We also have a Facebook page called The Movie Marquee. And we also have an email, which is themoviemarquee@gmail.com. So again, we thank you all for tuning in and going through this with us. If Anchor is one of those sites that you listen to us for the podcast, you can actually leave us messages. And we're going to start playing these messages on the podcast. Also on our Facebook page, we've been starting to do a little bit more conversations. So feel free to join us. You could even bring up some topics of your own that is movie related. On that note, any last words, gentlemen?
We'll see you next week at the movies, huh?
See you at the movies.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining. Goodbye.